Hi, I'm David Alberts, and welcome to the next instalment of BeenThereDoneThat Where Next, where we interview CMOs and influential people in the industry about where they believe we all need to go next. And today I'm very to have a good friend of the companies alongside us, Jess Spence from Beam Suntory. Jess, welcome.
Thank you.
And look, as we always do, Jess, you've had a fantastic career. And tell us, where have you been and what have you done to come to this point?
Goodness, yes. So I started in the advertising industry back in the old days in London and loved it, but realized very quickly that my clients had a much more interesting job than I did, in my view. So after a few years, decided to go and do an MBA and go client side and actually run a brand. And that was what I was really excited about. So set off on a journey that started in the beer industry with SAB Miller, first in London, and then took me on an incredible tour of Eastern Europe. I was in Russia, then in Slovakia and Poland, running increasing sort of scale of marketing organizations and building brands and understanding local consumers and making things happen. Then was lucky enough to move to Hong Kong, where I moved to Carlsberg, so still in beer, to run marketing and then marketing and sales for Asia. And so discovering that region. And then came back with Carlsberg to Copenhagen to take over as Chief Commercial Officer. So running all of our marketing and sales and innovation globally. Had a wonderful time there. And then about nearly 3-4 years ago now, moved to New York to take over as initially the global brands head for Beam Suntory, and now as the president of North America. So I'm now running all of our North America operations, sales, and taking on that P&L. So it's been a fantastic journey of traveling the world by selling alcohol.
No, it's not a bad. If you can't have a good time in that space, then you can't have a good time. And I think what's been always interesting with all the conversations we've had over the years is you've always been someone who has a really interesting point of view, and even though the voice may be a bit croaky today, has had a very strong voice on opinion. So thanks a lot for joining us. Yeah. So as always is the case, we ask the same 3 questions. And the first question is, what's the biggest challenge you, the company, as an industry, you think we're facing today?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots and lots of things that keep me up at night, but I think the biggest one really comes back to people. And I suppose ultimately, I think that's almost always the case. But the specific angle that I'm seeing really changing and concerning me is how we think about building our talent and building effectively human capital. And I think when I look at the last 4 years, what we've all been through and experienced in that, and then layer on the level of geopolitical challenge that is being experienced, and then layer on technology. What I'm seeing is, I think we need to be thinking very differently about the kind of talent that we value and the talent we build. And specifically, I think we still bias very heavily towards kind of experience and skill. I see so many times we're looking at people and we're like, well, they haven't done it before. They haven't done that specific thing. And I think what I'm seeing is the people who are really thriving right now in all of this uncertainty are the people who have incredible learning agility. And actually, the skill, that the technical job is becoming a lot less relevant than the approach to learning, the flexibility, the ability to deal with ambiguity, the ability to deal with scenarios. And I think when we look at also what our talent are looking for from us, particularly if you look at the younger generations, they're not interested in a linear building blocks. I will come up in a function and I will get a little bit more senior and I'll deal with a little bit more complexity. They're not interested in a job for life with a single company and signing up for that. And I think there's a real tension around how companies are thinking about their talent and managing them. what the world needs, and also what the younger talent is going to be looking for. And the companies who are able to best navigate through that are clearly going to win, because ultimately you're only, I strongly believe, in particularly in consumer goods, your biggest and most lasting source of competitive advantage ultimately is the people that you have and the culture you built with them. And that I think is a huge challenge for all of us.
Very interesting. It's so true. Look, I remember the first time we met, and you said, I don't care where it comes from. I just want to access people who can give me different points of view. Right? And even in the journey that we've had, and you at last point, Been There, Done That was all about people with experience. But actually, as we've evolved over the years, it's people who have different experiences. And I think you're right. It's kind of, what can you bring to the table from different points of view? Very interesting. And so in an ideal world, in this fight to attract the right type of talent, where do you imagine this could go?
I mean, I think it really does demand that we pretty radically rethink how we hire, but also how we evaluate and how we build internally. And I think when you look at, I was having a conversation with some colleagues, we were looking at job descriptions. The job descriptions are literally a list of the things we want somebody to have done. And I think that's how most organizations still operate. And that's also how we evaluate people internally. And I think you have to say, what are the mechanics we have to judge the way somebody is going to be able to respond to change? And how do you start to use that as your primary vector of evaluation? Of course, when you're in a role, you need to deliver specific things. But when you're looking at where a talent can go or how you're going to build a talent, we need to be building completely different career paths for people. We need to be evaluating them on the basis of how well they've adapted, how fast have they been able to pick up something new, how well have they been able to deal with ambiguity and complexity and reach a point where they can simplify and move forward, and really assess off that basis. And I don't see that, in any of really the kind of standard recruitment and talent management processes at the minute. So I think it's an absolutely fundamental shift where we need to almost rip up a lot of the processes that in some cases we're still in the business of embedding. I mean, when I look at how talent management has grown slightly, but broadly the last 15 years, it's been the same thing. And we're just trying to get better at that process. I think we've got to rethink it. And I think we've got to be willing to take risks on people, but calculated risk, because we do understand that they have that agility, and really shift our mindset away from, it's all about what they've done, to how do they think? How do they learn? And we don't even have assessment tools on that.
Very interesting. Very interesting. It really is kind of that what's got us here is not going to get us to where we need to go. So we do have to reevaluate that. So what would you say? And I think that's so true. And it does start in that description of what you look for and what you promote and what you celebrate. Yeah. So what would be the first step for people out there who the bells would be ringing and this would seriously resonate as leaders? What would be the first step you take to get us where we need to get to?
I mean, I think the first thing you have to do is actually just step back and take a kind of hard and honest look at, how do we do this today? How do we think about hiring people in? How do we think about who we promote? How do we think about how do we train and develop our people? And say, am I doing this through the mindset of building for a learning culture, building for agility, building for people who can deal with the incredible disruption that bluntly is going to continue to be around them? Or am I actually still very much judging people on a more traditional skills experience, what base? And you may find that there are pockets where you're actually doing some interesting things, and there are other areas where you aren't. And I think what's going to matter is getting that consistency and being very clear. And I think this is particularly, for people who are in a CMO position, but actually for anyone who's really also got a market-facing position, I think you have to be the voice of this at your leadership team. I don't think this is necessarily always going to come from HR and from CHROs. For me, when I was thinking about, does this apply across our organization, or is this really in specific pockets? I think it will apply across the organization, but I think it becomes most evident when you're in a market-facing role. Because what the market is demanding from you, the rate of change that consumers are open to and are expecting has been so dramatic. So I think, coming from the more commercial side of the business, whether that's sales, whether that's marketing, you have to be the voice for this, because you're the person who's going to suffer the most. Your team are going to be the most challenged if you don't achieve it. And so I think, that clear-eyed view, where are we in terms of how we buy talent, in terms of how we build talent? Are we actually assessing people and building them out to be these agile learning machines almost? Or are we building them in a more traditional, let's put the bricks in place that look like a sensible career path? Do that, be honest about it, be honest about where you want to be, and then really push for that change at a senior level, because it's only going to start, it's going to start from the top. And I think, one of the things that's really interesting to think about is there's a lot of talk at the minute about, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and rightly so. But we're still thinking about it in quite a narrow way. We're thinking about it very much in terms of diversity of ethnicity, diversity of gender. And I think one of the most, sorry, having an awful cough and sore throat day. I think one of the most interesting things to think about is diversity of experience. And I think as well, harnessing the whole D&I piece to say, yes, those elements of representation are incredibly important, but are you really thinking diversity of experience? Are you looking at people who actually bring something new, who have been able to demonstrate that they can perform and succeed in a huge range of environments? And ones that have been, potentially way outside of their comfort zone? That's what will give you the kind of richness. And that's, I think, where you unlock a lot of the benefits of diversity in terms of innovation, in terms of superior growth that we talk about. It's only going to be when you get diversity of experience alongside diversity of, more gender and traditional levels of representation that you're actually going to see those benefits. So harness that. That's something that every organization has a big focus on right now. Use it and make sure you're having that conversation with the leadership team to say, what is real diversity, and how are we achieving that, and how are we measuring that? So I think those would be the areas that I would really start with, I think.
Look, it just makes me think, actually. It makes me think about, our organization and the organizations we see. And I think the change you're talking about and where next is a change of attitude of leadership. And, hearing, if I heard my president of North America talking that way, that would be inspiring to me, whether I was in day one of the job or, year 21, because it means that everyone is open who is open to learning, to progress. So, Jess, as always, this has been really interesting, and I always come away learning something from listening to you. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us, and particularly given your doing lots of talking and the throat. So I really appreciate it, and as always, I hope everyone out there, I'm sure everyone out there will appreciate hearing your thoughts on Been There, Done That, Where Next. And I think it's a very interesting Where Next from Jess Spence, President of North America for Beam Suntory. So, but Jess, speak to you soon, and thanks a lot for your time, and we'll speak.
Thank you so much for having me on.